Well, good morning. Today we're going to talk about beer. I'm not suggesting we have one this early on a Sunday morning, but I think the changes the brewing industry has gone through over the years is a pretty interesting story. Really, it's a story of entrepreneurship and economic development, and it's fitting that we tell that story today as the curtain comes down on Craft Beer Week in Marquette. Our conversation starts right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, according to historians, home brewing began in America when English colonists first settled in the New World. The craft brewing industry as we know it today in Michigan probably got its start in the 1990s, and it's grown into more than a $10 billion industry. Today we're going to talk about this growing industry with two people who took the plunge into that business about 9 or 10 years ago. My guests are Andy Langlois and David Manson, the founders of Black Rocks Brewery. Andy, David, welcome to the Ryan Report.
Well, thanks for having us.
Thanks for being
here. My tradition is to kind of get to know people first so the audience know our guests. David, where did you start? Or Andy, where did life start for you?
Kingsford, Michigan, okay. 80 miles south here of Marquette, and went to school there. Came up to Marquette for NMU.
Okay.
Went to college here, moved away for a while, played music a bit down in the desert in Arizona, and toured around, and then moved back here. Okay. I got married to Stephanie, my wife, and the draw of Marquette and Lake Superior was a bit too much, and we decided we need to get back home, so okay. Came back up here.
And you were actually a professional musician at one point.
Yeah.
You still do some singing?
Yeah, every Sunday at the pub.
Okay,
yeah.
All right. David, I think you're from Marquette, right?
That's right. Yep, born and raised in Marquette. Went to Marquette Senior High School, and then kind of a similar circuitous route back, and fortunate to have been able to do that, but went to school down at Michigan State and then lived in Chicago for a while. Met my bride, Wendy, in school there, and then got to a point after a couple of years of living in the big city that she kind of wanted to move to this bucolic, beautiful home we call Marquette.
Okay, I know you both were in sales jobs at one point, and I think you both wound up working at the same company at one point. Is that right. How you met?
We did. David had been working at a pharma company for quite a few years.
Yeah.
And then I joined in about halfway through his time there, and we worked together at this at a pharma company. We were selling drugs, the legal drugs.
Legal drugs.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we had, it's Marquette. We had known each other and had a lot of mutual friends that, kind of bespoke to perhaps either or both of our characters to one another eventually. We kind of came together and became partners in a corporate existence.
Okay, so about 9 or 10 years ago, somewhere in that range, you guys decided to make a big change. And
I don't know if we decided that, Don. Pharma's was going through sort of a downtick, and so in May of 2010, we had this massive conference call where they basically said we're going to be laying people off.
How did you decide that this was where you're going to go, into the brewery business?
Well, for about 4 years prior to that event that David was speaking of, we started home brewing.
Okay.
And it was a fun creative outlet for us. It's always fun to create something that you can consume and share with friends, and so we spent pretty much every weekend home brewing over in his basement or outside in his backyard.
Okay.
And it was great, just getting a good feel for the actual home brewing, and then using that to you always toss around this idea like, well, boy, it'd be kind of cool to do this someday.
Yeah. Maybe we'd retire, do something after our career at Pharma was done.
Yeah.
Well, that got cut short.
Saw the writing on the wall a bit there, and we kind of made an agreement. Well, if this happens, maybe we should just go in full bore and go in this direction.
How confident were you when you took this big step? And you're shaking your head.
Not at all. We had no idea. I mean, up until that point, we had the Vierling, and they were able to represent craft beer at their establishment, but nothing had been basically solely constructed as a microbrewery with a tasting room like we had.
And you not only had to create the beer, but you also had to create a place to sell it.
Absolutely.
And how did you come upon that the place you settled on 3rd Street in Marquette?
You know, we were looking at a lot of different locations, and you know, our good friend Tom Veer asked us to look at the property that he had owned there, and we kind of went in the building and looked around and thought, well, if we remove some walls, and 3rd Street area here has a lot of traffic, and it's kind of this mix of, you know, in a residential area, but also it's got that commercial feel as well, and it just felt right after seeing through the walls and what we could possibly do, and we were very conservative to start, so our expectations were that, you know, we only need that first floor to serve what our demand would be.
And what was that demand? You know, what was the response?
Well, I think the demand was much higher than we thought.
Which
yeah,
is what you like.
Our expectations were, you know, we'd brew a little bit. Kind of our homebrew mentality was such that, you know, 5 gallons is quite a bit of beer. You know, if we do like, just say we do 20 or more, you know, we're gonna be all right. And what we found is that the market in Marquette was pretty ripe for craft beer. And David mentioned earlier that the Veerling was the only brew pub in town,
Right.
and you know, the Keweenaw Brewing really laid down some tracks for us too, because they kind of started that up in Houghton, and I think Marquette was ready to say, all right, we need a microbrewery, and fortunately we got laid off and started a microbrewery.
So it all worked out.
Yeah.
And as you said, you know, as you look at it now, was it the atmosphere you created, or the beer you were creating, or maybe a combination of the both?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it was a combination of everything. I mean, we took a novel idea of an old home, essentially, and created a place where most people feel comfortable there. It's not one style over another. It's really just kind of a place to meet, talk, have some craft beer, and we've tried to keep that feeling in every little expansion of the property that we had.
We'll talk more about that and where you went from there in just a couple of minutes. We'll be back with more on today's show after we take this 2-minute break. Our guests this morning are Andy Langlois and David Manson from Black Rocks Brewery. You know, I have to tell you again why I'm kind of fascinated by this, because I know a little of the history, not that I was there. But you know, the German immigrants came here and started these small breweries. And then kind of after Prohibition, you know, the big label beers really started to grow, you know, the beers that made Milwaukee famous, you know, the Millers and
sure.
Pabst and Blatz. And a lot of them were advertisers in the early days when I was working here. And then they started to buy each other, you know, and so pretty soon all of them were owned by 2 or 3 companies.
Right.
And I guess Samuel Adams calls itself the first craft beer. So, you know, to you, was that the start of this new cycle where now we're starting all over again, really?
Yeah, I think you know, historically we're actually reaching about the level, or we might have slowly passed it.
I think we just surpassed it.
Yeah, the amount of microbreweries that the U.S. had throughout the States is right about now being reached to where it was pre-Prohibition levels.
Okay.
Prohibition hit, pretty much decimated the industry.
Right.
As you mentioned, then there was some of the regional and becoming even larger companies. And then I think, you know, it wasn't until really 78, I think, when Jimmy Carter enacted the homebrew law that allowed people to legally homebrew,
Okay.
that people started to experiment beyond just American light lagers. And then they started to demand a little bit more of a variety. I think you saw an import increase because it was different. So you saw German beers and some English beers coming to the market. And then, you know, a few people took an initial plunge into creating a U.S. microbrewery that was different.
You know, I was doing a little reading, and I was reading it was about Bell's and Founders, 2 of the big ones in
Michigan, for
as
sure.
people know. And I think it was one of the guys from Founders who said, you know, they really weren't doing that well until they started just putting the emphasis on the product,
Right.
and they came up with some unusual brews. And so the answer wasn't just to create what the old big guys were providing. It was to provide something new, right?
Yeah, I think the palates of craft beer drinkers out there is definitely developing over the years, and they demand more. They demand quality products, full flavors, good hop profiles, and that's what kind of makes it exciting, and that's what drives even new styles that you're starting to see in the U.S. and I know even in Europe they're starting to look to the U.S. and what are they doing over there now? Because they're coming up with some pretty creative styles that maybe didn't exist.
So you had a pretty good business going on 3rd Street in Marquette. You did some expansion, and things
Yep.
like that. But then at some point you decided to go beyond that and started to can your beer. How did that
Right.
decision come about?
When you keep running out of beer, you need to figure out a way to make more beer. We just didn't have the physical footprint at 3rd Street to create what was in demand. And so we thought, well, let's try to kill two birds with one stone and meet our demand, but also put our foot into the market as far as distribution products go.
And ironically, you bought an old Coca-Cola bottling plant.
Yeah.
Yeah, the place
Feels
is
good to reuse it.
Yeah, it's a great place. We went in there. It was like a cold February night. It was old brick building and needed some work. And we were there with our head brewer at the time, and he just looked around and said, "This looks like a brewery. This should be we should go here." And it was neat because initially we were thinking, well, we'll keep the place on 3rd Street, but maybe we just need a bigger place somewhere else. And that didn't really make a lot of sense to us. The pub is hospitality oriented, and diversifying and going into distribution was a whole nother end, which was great. It wasn't like we were cannibalizing our own business or our own efforts. We could kind of branch out a little bit.
But brewing the beer is one thing, but getting it out there in the marketplace has to really be a difficult thing. How do you go about that?
It's a lot of this magic 8-ball. Do we make more? No, it's we work with our distributors. We really couldn't do what we do without a really good relationship with the different distributors.
And that's a key point, I think. That you don't distribute it. You work with someone else.
We work with currently in Michigan. We have 5 distributors throughout the state. We have 4 in Wisconsin, and really, it was something that we used to kind of begrudgingly think was a relationship of necessity, but it's a really important relationship for us.
And what do they expect from you? What keeps them interested in you?
Well, I'd say they want product, which we're having a hard time keeping up this summer. Well, every summer, I'd say our growth is pretty conservative. We let the market really make it clear that we should be growing before we actually grow. There's a lot of breweries out there growing maybe too quickly, and so we're kind of letting the distributors dictate and say, hey guys, you should probably buy some more stainless and fill it up with beer. So that's kind of as long as we can produce that beer and get it out to them and provide some support to them out in the field a little bit here and there. That's what we try to do.
While maintaining quality, we want to maintain the quality of life for our employees, and we don't want something to drop as far as what we expect to be putting out there.
Okay, we'll talk more about that in just a couple of minutes. Back with more on today's show after we take one more 2-minute break. Again, our guests this morning are Andy Langlois and David Manson from Black Rocks Brewery. We were talking about distribution and things before we left. Are you at a point now where you can produce all you need and want in the facility you have, or you must have to think where do you go in the future?
Well, I take that back. No. I mean, our facility is big enough to add some more tanks. And it's something we were just talking about today. Like, should we be adding some more tanks? And it's kind of looking like possibly. But the facility has got a little space left. But I don't know. We have this talk often. Like, if we get this incredible support from the UP and Michigan and a lot of Wisconsin, and it's great. And you want to continue to grow. But there's a point too where you go, all right, maybe this is a good place right now when we just focus on continuing to put out solid craft beer and stay where we're at. So, but I don't know. Right now, it looks
It's a constant conversation.
Yeah, it looks like we made a good choice in the facility that we went into, and so I think we're good for a while.
I was looking on your website, and it says I think maybe like 18 different beers, although not all of them are available all the time, right?
Right. Yeah, seasonals, one-offs. You know, we'll do something in the winter that'll be just a short, brief, kind of darker option for us, and then we'll do a one-time only canning run of something, because it's fun to, even at the production level, keep that experimentation
What are the
alive.
ones that really keep you going? What are the most popular ones?
51K IPA, Grand Rapids Dry Hop Cream Ale, Coconut Brown. Micus is starting to come in, which is another IPA, and then the Classic Pilsner, and then the variety of seasonals: Honey Lavender, Lager Rhythm. I mean, there's a lot.
Do you worry? You know, is the market fickle? I mean, with so many brewers out there, I think there are over 300 in Michigan, for example.
Correct.
You know, do you worry that someone's going to come and knock you off your pedestal?
Every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's definitely more crowded than it was when we started, and definitely more crowded last year than it was the year prior. And you know, you can worry about it, but at the same time, you just focus on making quality beer and try not to chase fads. There's a lot of fads out there, and they might be fun to take the qualities from those fads and introduce them into your own styles, but. I don't know. Not too worried about it.
We can only control what we can
You can't
control.
control it. You know,
What do you see as your biggest challenges as you run the business on a daily basis?
For us,
Yes.
you know, I think it's that discussion of what is our end game, what is our next step, and where does that put us towards an unknown end game. We don't have an end game. We don't have a particular level where we want to stop, but growth is a manageable and managing heavy thing. It's not easy.
Is it difficult to get the raw materials you need? Is that ever an issue? Or?
Sometimes.
Sometimes hops are difficult, you know, depending on the year, the crop year, and how much rain they had out in Yakima or in New Zealand, and you're trying to get these important hops that are, you know, crucial to flagship beers, and so you have to contract out, like, you know, what do we do, 6 years? We contract out, and it's really looking in the crystal ball at that point, because you're going, boy, how many are we going to need in 2022? You know, I don't know. We have to kind of guess, and then hopefully that's available for you should you need it. And
add on to that the fact that there are this, you know, vast amount of breweries coming online, and everybody wants to kind of access the same pie of raw materials, and so then that pie shrinks and makes it a little bit more difficult for everybody to access them.
We have only a half minute left. How many employees do you have now?
22, I think?
22.
Okay,
Yeah.
and there must be some in there that are really key to this whole operation.
Of course there are, yeah. Andrew
Everybody
Reeves, our production brewer, Chris Hutt, who's our pub brewer, and I mean Neil Washburn, who's our production line guy, and our cellarman Alex Leckie. I mean, to me, every one of them is super valuable. We can't do it without them.
It's right down to the glass washers and the mug wranglers at the pub. I mean, if anybody's lagging behind, it's not gonna be good for the operation.
Well, as I said at the beginning, it's not just about beer, it's about the entrepreneurship and really all that goes with it. And thanks for coming in and sharing your story this morning.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
Okay.
thanks, Don.
I'll be back with some other thoughts for you in just a couple of minutes. You know, for those in the news business or the comedy business, news headlines have always been a source of humor. You know, in the old days it was primarily newspapers, but today it also affects television news gatherers as they post their stories on the internet with sometimes awkward or not well thought out headlines. In any case, I thought this would be a good day to share some other interesting headlines I came across while surfing the internet recently. I should point out these are not headlines from our area newspapers, but some classics from around the country. Headlines like, "City unsure why the sewer smells." Well, we could probably give them some ideas about that. Or how about, "Homeless man under house arrest"? I wonder how they pulled that one off. There are also some pretty strange headlines like, "Man eats underwear to beat breathalyzer." I don't get the connection, but I'd love to see the story that went with that headline. This was a headline in a Sacramento newspaper. State population to double by 2040. Babies to blame. You know, I might put the blame somewhere else, but let's leave it at that. Sometimes it's not really the headlines, but the story itself that provides the humor, like Weight Watchers demonstrator shoplifts cupcakes. Guess they couldn't resist. Or this story, a deputy responded to a report of a vehicle stopping at mailboxes. You guessed it, it was the mailman. Like I said, it's not the headline, but the story. And imagine this one. Worker suffers leg pain after crane drops 800-pound ball on his head. I would really like to know more about that story. I have just a few more, like the headline that said, bridges help people cross rivers. I wonder what genius made that discovery. Or how about this? Missing woman unwittingly joins search party looking for herself. I wonder when someone in the group figured that out. And I guess this would get my vote for really overstating the obvious. Bugs flying around with wings are flying bugs. I hope that headline wasn't on a story telling us about some costly government study that made this startling discovery. And let me leave you with this story this morning. It's not a headline, but a correction. The story says, in a recipe published recently, one of the ingredients was misstated due to an error. The correct ingredient is 2 teaspoons of cilantro instead of 2 teaspoons of cement. You know, I chuckle every time I read that. I'll be back in a minute. We need to wrap it up for today. Keep in mind, if you miss our show, it is available at uppermichigansource.com. Thanks to Andy Langlois and David Manson for joining us this week to talk about their company and the craft brewing industry in Michigan. I'm glad you joined us for the conversation and look forward to seeing you again next Sunday morning.